Clara's hands trembled as she balanced the tray of expensive wine bottles. The entire restaurant had fallen silent, except for one sound, the heartbreaking sobs of a small child. She glanced toward the private corner booth where every server had been warned not to approach. The cries grew louder, more desperate. She watched as the man holding the child, a devastatingly handsome figure in a charcoal suit, looked more lost than any powerful man should ever look. Their eyes met across the crowded room. His were stormy amber, exhausted and pleading. Before her manager could stop her, Clara's feet were already moving toward the forbidden table. She didn't know that the man was Victor, the most dangerous Mafia boss in New York. She only knew that no child should cry like that. As she walked closer, the restaurant seemed to disappear around her. The elegant dining room, the crystal chandeliers, the clink of silverware, all of it faded into a blur. The boy's wails filled her ears as she approached. He couldn't have been more than 3 years old, dressed in tiny dress pants and a button-down shirt. His tear-streaked face was buried against his father's shoulder. Victor's face was hard, his jaw clenched. But the way his broad shoulders seemed to curve inward, shielding the boy from the world, spoke of a vulnerability Clara hadn't expected. The bodyguards around them stood at attention, but the desperation in Victor's eyes made her stomach tighten. "Clara, don't!" Damien, the head server, hissed from behind her. "Stay away from that table. Do not approach. Do not make eye contact. Understand?" But it was too late. Clara was already crouching down beside them, her heart aching for the little boy. His cries were raw, grief, loss, the kind of pain that went deeper than just a tantrum. "Hi there," Clara said softly, her voice gentle, as she crouched to meet the boy's eyes. "My name is Clara." Lucia, the little girl, peeked up at her from her father's arms, her tear-streaked face showing a glimmer of curiosity despite her pain. "That's a lot of big feelings for such a little one," Clara continued, offering a small smile. "It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel sad." Victor watched in silence, his lips tight, his eyes locked on Clara with an intensity that made her breath catch. She felt something shift in the air between them, a subtle, unspoken tension. "Please," Victor's voice cracked, the desperation in it pulling at Clara's heart. "She's been like this for weeks. Nothing works." His voice was barely above a whisper. "The doctors say she's grieving, that she needs time." Clara nodded, her heart softening. She understood that grief. The grief of a motherless child. The grief of a father who didn't know how to ease his child's pain. "I had a little brother," Clara said softly, her eyes on Lucia, who now stared at her with wide, tear-filled eyes. "When he was sad, we used to count stars together." Lucia hiccuped, her cries slowly quieting. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, but didn't look away from Clara. "Your papa looks really strong," Clara continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I bet he could lift you high enough to touch the ceiling. Would you like that?" Lucia's small hand loosened from her father's shirt, and for the first time she looked at Clara, her big, brown eyes full of curiosity. Clara smiled softly. "Let's take a deep breath together, okay? In through your nose," she demonstrated, "and out through your mouth." Lucia copied her, breathing in and out, her tiny chest rising and falling. There was a long moment of silence. Then, almost imperceptibly, Lucia's crying stopped. The whole room seemed to exhale with relief. Victor, still watching Clara, finally spoke. You did that. In seconds." Clara's gaze met his. He wasn't the cold, terrifying figure she had imagined. In that moment, she saw the cracks in his armor, the exhaustion, the raw desperation. She had just calmed his daughter in a way he hadn't been able to for weeks. And then, without warning, Lucia reached for her. Clara's breath caught in her throat as the little girl's arms stretched out to her. "Please," Victor's voice was barely audible, thick with something that might have been awe. "Just for a moment." Clara hesitated only for a heartbeat before she opened her arms. Lucia practically leaped into her embrace, her tiny body warm against Clara's chest. The child sighed deeply, as though she'd been holding her breath for months. Clara's eyes welled with tears as she held the little girl close, gently rocking her. She hadn't expected to be drawn in this way, to feel the weight of this father's brokenness, this child's grief. Victor stood behind her, his gaze intense, a quiet tension building in the air between them. For just a moment, the world outside that booth seemed to disappear. Clara was no longer just a waitress. She was someone who had connected with the most fragile part of this man's life, the one part he couldn't control. When she finally looked up, their eyes met again. Victor's gaze was filled with something Clara couldn't name, but it sent a shiver down her spine. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice low, almost reverent. "Clara Mitchell," she said softly, still holding Lucia. "Clara Mitchell," he repeated, as though committing it to memory. "How did you do that?" "I just understood what she needed." Victor nodded, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes that made Clara's pulse quicken. Something that made her wonder how her life had gotten tangled up with his. "Do you want to help her?" Victor asked. The question hung in the air between them, thick with meaning. Clara didn't know how to answer. But she knew one thing for certain. This moment was going to change everything. Clara's hand still shook slightly as she walked back to the kitchen, her mind racing. The moment she held Lucia, the quiet in the restaurant, and the intensity of Victor's gaze, it was all so overwhelming. She could still feel the weight of the little girl in her arms, the soft, trusting sigh as Lucia fell asleep against her chest. It felt like she had crossed some invisible line, one she hadn't known existed. Back in the kitchen, Clara busied herself with menial tasks, trying to push away the strange feeling that had settled in her chest. But it wasn't working. Not when she kept replaying the look in Victor's eyes, the way his entire demeanor had shifted when Lucia had calmed. And then there was the way he had spoken to her, like she was someone who could actually change something for him. Like she was the answer to a question he hadn't been able to ask. "Clara!" Damien's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Table 7 needs more wine. Let's go, we're short on staff tonight." She nodded absently, but her thoughts were still with the man in the corner booth, and his daughter. The rest of her shift passed in a blur, her body on autopilot as she moved between tables, smiling and pretending like her world hadn't just been turned upside down. At the end of the night, when the last of the guests had left and the restaurant was quiet again, Clara began to clean up. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out to find a message from Sophia. "Heard about the guy with the kid. You okay?" Clara stared at the screen, her mind still tangled in the events of the evening. Her fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before she typed back. "Yeah. Just a lot to process." Sophia had warned her. She had warned her that getting involved with someone like Victor was a dangerous game. And she had also warned her that someone like him didn't just disappear. But that thought, for some reason, didn't scare Clara. It wasn't the danger that made her heart race. It was the pull between them, the connection she couldn't deny. The restaurant's door opened, and she glanced up to see a tall figure standing in the doorway, casting a long shadow across the polished floor. It was Victor. His dark suit still fit him like it had been sewn onto his body, but now, in the quiet of the restaurant, he didn't seem so imposing. He wasn't surrounded by his usual security, and the harshness in his eyes was softened by the exhaustion that still clung to him. "Clara," he said, his voice low and measured. He didn't look like a man who was used to asking for help, but here he was, standing in the doorway like he didn't know how to enter this space. She looked at him, unsure of how to respond. There was a tension between them, an unspoken agreement that neither of them had made. But now, standing in front of him, the question seemed inevitable. "What are you doing here?" Clara asked, her voice steady despite the swirl of emotions inside her. Victor paused, glancing around the empty restaurant. "I wanted to thank you." Clara's brow furrowed. "Thank me? For what?" "For helping Lucia," he said, his voice softening. "She's been lost, and I've been out of my depth. You did something tonight I couldn't do in weeks." Clara wasn't sure how to respond to that. She had done nothing extraordinary. She had just listened to a child in pain. But she could see that to him, it meant everything. "She's just a kid," Clara said quietly. "I just gave her what she needed." Victor's eyes locked on hers. There was no denying the weight of his gaze, the tension in the way he stood in front of her, as if every word mattered. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But most people can't do that. You're different." Clara felt the familiar rush of heat flood her cheeks at his words. She looked down at the floor, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. "I don't know what you want from me," Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just a waitress." Victor stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "I want your help," he said simply. "With Lucia. She needs you. And, if I'm honest, I need you too." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Clara swallowed, her throat tight. She had only meant to help a grieving child, to offer a brief moment of comfort. But now, standing face to face with Victor, the boundaries between them had started to blur. "Victor!" Her voice trailed off as she searched his eyes, looking for something, some sign that he wasn't just another powerful man trying to manipulate her. "I'm not asking for anything more than your help with Lucia," he said, his voice earnest. "I won't pressure you. I won't make you do anything you don't want to do. But I can't do this without you, Clara. And I won't pretend I don't want you around." Her heart raced, her breath quickening. She should walk away. She should say no and leave him standing here alone, but something inside her was telling her that this moment was too important to walk away from. Clara took a slow breath, her mind spinning with the possibilities. "I'll think about it," she said softly, her words more uncertain than she wanted them to be. Victor's eyes darkened, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. "You don't have much time," he said, his voice low. "I'll wait until morning. But don't keep me waiting too long, Clara." And with that, he turned and walked out, his presence still hanging in the air. Clara stood frozen in place, the weight of his words settling deep within her. She hadn't just stepped into Victor's world, she had been pulled into it. And now, there was no way out. Clara barely slept that night. She sat in her small studio apartment, the black card Victor had given her lying on the coffee table, staring back at her. The weight of his words, the intensity of his gaze, and the strange pull she felt toward him consumed her thoughts. How had everything changed so quickly? One moment she was a waitress, living a life full of routine and loneliness, and now she was tangled up in a world she barely understood. The quiet hum of the city outside did little to settle her mind. She ran her fingers over the edges of the card, wondering how much of her life would change if she picked up the phone. And yet, a part of her already knew. She wasn't just contemplating a decision about a job. This was about something far bigger, something that would change her forever. At exactly 5 a.m., her phone buzzed, startling her. A message from Sophia popped up on the screen. "You didn't really consider calling him, did you?" Clara smiled wryly and typed back, "I don't know. I don't know what I'm doing." Sophia's response was quick. "Just remember, he's not the kind of man you get involved with." Clara stared at the message for a long moment, the doubt creeping in. What was she doing? She had no idea what kind of world Victor was really part of, only the little glimpses she had seen, the powerful aura, the quiet desperation. But it was more than that. It was the way Lucia had clung to her, the way the little girl had found comfort in her arms, and the way Victor had looked at her like she was something important. By the time the sun started to rise, Clara had made up her mind. She picked up the phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed the number from the black card. The phone rang once, twice, and then, to her surprise, Victor answered on the third ring. "I knew you'd call." His voice was rough with sleep, but there was no mistaking the satisfaction in it. "Victor," Clara said, her voice steadier than she felt. I want to help. With Lucia. But there are conditions." He was silent for a moment, and Clara could almost feel him calculating, weighing her words. "I'm listening," he said, his voice hardening just slightly. "I keep my restaurant job. I help her 3 days a week. The rest of the time, I'm just me. If it doesn't work, I walk away. No questions. No consequences." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Clara held her breath, waiting for him to push back, to try and control the terms. But instead, Victor spoke slowly, thoughtfully. "Fair enough," he said at last. "But I have one condition as well." Clara raised an eyebrow, her stomach tightening with curiosity. "What's that?" "You don't walk away without telling me why. If something isn't right, you tell me. I can't fix what I don't understand." His words hit her harder than she expected. There was something vulnerable, something deeply human in them. She had expected him to be cold, to use his power to force her into his world. Instead, he was giving her a choice, a voice in the matter. "Okay," Clara whispered. "I'll tell you." Victor didn't wait for another response. "My driver will pick you up at 9 a.m. Wear comfortable clothes. Lucia likes to play outside." "Today?" Clara asked, surprised by the urgency. "You had all night to think about it, Clara. And I told you, I'm not a patient man." The line clicked, and she was left with a buzzing silence that settled over her like a weight. When the SUV arrived at exactly 9 o'clock, Clara hesitated for a moment before she stepped outside. She wasn't sure if she was making the right decision. Was she walking into a world she would never be able to leave? Or was she helping a little girl who needed her? The drive to the Russo estate was long and silent, the city giving way to the sprawling mansion behind high iron gates. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as the driver pulled through the gates, revealing a property that looked more like a palace than a home. Stone facades, manicured gardens, a fountain in the driveway. It was the kind of place where people lived who had more money than anyone should ever need. The car came to a stop in front of the massive front door, and before Clara could even process the beauty of the place, the door opened. Elena, the house manager, stood waiting, her sharp eyes taking in Clara's every move as she stepped out of the car. "Miss Mitchell," Elena greeted her, her voice formal but not unfriendly. "Mr. Russo is expecting you." Clara nodded, following her inside. The moment she stepped into the foyer, she was struck by the enormity of the place. The ceilings were high, and the floors were polished marble, glistening under the soft light from the crystal chandeliers. The entire space felt cold and distant, yet strangely welcoming. She followed Elena through the house, feeling smaller and smaller as the rooms grew more luxurious. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, until they finally reached the living room where Victor was waiting. He sat on the floor, in a white dress shirt and suit pants, looking almost out of place in the casual setting. Lucia was having a meltdown in front of him, throwing toy cars across the room, screaming at the top of her lungs. Victor looked up as Clara entered. The relief in his eyes was almost painful to witness. "Thank God," he breathed. "She's been like this since she woke up." Clara set her bag down, her heart tightening at the sight of the little girl. "Let's see what we can do," she said, her voice calm as she walked toward Lucia. The room was chaotic, but Clara stayed steady, her mind focused on the task at hand. As she sat on the floor, she watched Lucia's angry outbursts soften slightly. The boy who had once been a stranger to her was now her responsibility, and somehow Clara knew she was here for a reason, no matter how dangerous or messy this world might be. Victor watched her closely, his eyes filled with a kind of awe. For the first time, It seemed like he wasn't trying to control the situation. He was just watching, hoping. The next few days passed in a blur for Clara. The mansion, the strange new world she had stepped into, felt both overwhelming and strangely comforting. Every morning, the black SUV would pull up to her apartment, and she would climb inside, headed back to the Russo estate. Each visit brought her closer to Lucia, but also to Victor, the man who haunted her thoughts in a way she hadn't expected. Victor wasn't just a Mafia boss. He was a father who had been stripped of the ability to protect his daughter from the grief and loss that clung to her like a shadow. Clara had seen the exhaustion in his eyes, the quiet desperation that no amount of power could fix. On the fourth day, Clara arrived at the estate to find Victor pacing in the front hallway, his face tight with frustration. His dark eyes lifted to meet hers, and there was a flicker of something in them, something raw. "Clara," he said, his voice a little rough. "Come with me." She followed him through the house, the silence between them thick and uncomfortable. The sound of Lucia laughing in the distance, her first real laugh in days, echoed through the halls, a welcome relief from the tension in the air. When they reached a smaller, more intimate room at the back of the house, Victor turned to face her. "I need your help," he said, his voice dropping low. Clara raised an eyebrow, unsure where this conversation was heading. "With Lucia?" He shook his head, running a hand through his dark hair. "No. It's something else." Clara waited, her heart pounding in her chest. Whatever he was about to say, she knew it wasn't going to be easy. "You don't have to tell me," she said, her voice gentle. "You know I'm here for Lucia." Victor didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. For a moment, there was an almost imperceptible shift, something between them that Clara couldn't quite name, but she felt it. "I didn't want to bring you into this," he said, his voice strained. "But I don't have a choice anymore. People in my world, they don't play by the same rules as everyone else." Clara felt a cold shiver crawl down her spine. "What do you mean?" Victor's jaw clenched, and his gaze darkened. "I mean that there are threats, Clara. People who will use anything to get to me, my family, my business, even Lucia." He paused, his eyes flashing with a warning that sent a chill through Clara's body. "And if they think you're close to me, they'll target you." Clara felt her heart race, her mind spinning. She had known, deep down, that there was a reason Victor had been so insistent on keeping her close. But hearing the words out loud, hearing the weight of the danger he was asking her to step into, felt like a slap in the face. "I don't want to be a part of that world," she said, her voice firm. Victor looked at her, his expression unreadable. "You already are," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to join my world. I'm asking you to protect Lucia. And you can't do that if you stay on the sidelines. You'll be dragged into it, whether you want to be or not." Clara's mind raced, the implications of what he was saying settling into the pit of her stomach. She hadn't expected this. She had hoped, naively, maybe, that she could help Lucia, be there for her without being dragged into the violence and danger that defined Victor's life. "You're not asking for help," Clara said slowly, her voice tight with the realization. "You're asking me to stay. To stay in this mess." Victor's gaze softened, and he stepped closer, his voice low. "I'm asking you to stay because you've already made a difference. In Lucia's life. In mine. You're the only one who's been able to get through to her. And now, I need you to help me keep her safe." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Clara looked at him, her heart torn between the desire to protect the little girl she had come to care for and the undeniable pull she felt toward the man who had brought her into this world. For a moment, she stood there, unsure. Her gaze dropped to the floor, and she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. "I don't know if I can do this," Clara whispered, her voice cracking. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Victor's hand brushed hers, and for a split second Clara felt the electricity between them, the same heat that had been building since the moment they had met. "You are strong enough," he said quietly. "You already are." There was a long silence before Clara spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if I say no?" Victor's eyes met hers, and for the first time Clara saw something vulnerable in his gaze, something that made her heart ache. "If you say no," he said softly, "I'll respect it. But I can't promise I'll be able to protect you from this world." The air between them felt thick, charged with emotions neither of them fully understood. And Clara knew, in that moment, that whatever decision she made, her life would never be the same. Victor leaned in slightly, his breath warm against her ear. "Please stay, Clara." The words lingered in the air as the tension between them built higher. Clara's heart pounded in her chest, her thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and desire. The pull between them was undeniable, but the danger, his world, was more than she had ever anticipated. But as she looked into his eyes, she knew there was no turning back. "I'll stay," she whispered, her voice steady, though her heart was anything but. Victor's eyes softened, his lips curving into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "You won't regret this." But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the true test was only just beginning. The days following Clara's decision were a blur of chaos, tension, and unspoken emotions. As the weeks passed, she settled into a strange rhythm, balancing her work at the restaurant and her new role at the Russo estate. Clara spent her days with Lucia, trying to create some sense of normalcy for the little girl. They played in the garden, had tea parties with toy cups, and counted the stars at night, a ritual Clara had begun with Lucia the first time she'd calmed her. The child's smiles were becoming more frequent, but there was still a heaviness in her eyes, a sadness that Clara couldn't quite erase. Victor remained a constant presence in their lives, but his world never fully left them. He was always just a phone call away, always in the background, his dangerous world looming over everything. At night, when Clara lay in the guest room, her thoughts often drifted to him. The closeness between them was undeniable. Every shared glance, every fleeting touch, his fingers brushing hers, his voice soft and pleading when Lucia needed him, drove her further into the web of his world. It was all so intense, so raw. And yet, despite the danger, despite the parts of his life that terrified her, Clara couldn't deny the pull. One evening, after dinner, Clara found herself alone in the study with Victor. Lucia had fallen asleep early, exhausted from a full day of play. Victor had asked her to meet him in the room that had become a sanctuary for both of them. The mansion was silent, save for the low hum of the city in the distance. Victor was standing by the window, looking out over the city skyline. His posture was tense, but there was something different about him tonight. He wasn't the ruthless Mafia boss she had first met. In this moment, he was just a man who had loved and lost, a man who would do anything to protect his family. Clara stepped into the room, her heart racing. She had been avoiding this conversation, but she knew it was coming. "Victor," she said softly, her voice breaking the silence. "What is it?" He turned to face her, his eyes dark, filled with a storm she couldn't quite understand. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice low and heavy. "I've kept you in the dark too long, and I need you to understand what you're really stepping into." Clara swallowed, her pulse quickening. She had heard the warnings. She knew the risks. But hearing him say it, hearing him admit the danger so plainly, felt like a slap to the face. "I understand," Clara said, her voice steady despite the knot of fear in her stomach. "I've seen enough. I know this world is dangerous. But I'm here for Lucia, and that's all that matters." Victor shook his head slowly. "It's not just about Lucia. It's about you. You're already involved, Clara. And you need to know what that means." The air between them felt charged, like the calm before a storm. Clara met his gaze, her heart in her throat. She could see it, the weight of his world pressing down on him, the burden of keeping everyone he loved safe. "I'm not afraid of you, Victor," she said quietly. "I'm not afraid of the things you do. But I need you to understand that I can't live in constant fear. I need you to let me in. To trust me. Let me help you." Victor's eyes flickered with something, a glimmer of something unspoken, and for a brief moment he looked almost vulnerable. But the hardness in his gaze returned quickly. "I trust you more than you think," he murmured. "But there's a line I can't cross. Not with you." Clara didn't understand. She stepped closer, feeling the pull between them growing stronger. "What does that mean?" Victor's jaw clenched as he took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. His hand reached out, brushing a lock of hair from her face. The simple gesture sent a shiver down her spine. "It means that I protect what's mine. And I protect you, Clara. But if you stay in my world, you'll be a target. You'll be exposed to everything I've spent years hiding. And I can't lose you." His voice broke on the last words, a rawness that sent Clara's heart into a free fall. "I'm not going anywhere," Clara whispered, her hand reaching up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "I'm not afraid of you. I'm afraid of losing you, too." For a moment, they stood there, locked in a silence that spoke more than words ever could. Victor's hand cupped her face, his thumb gently tracing her cheek. "I won't let anything happen to you," he promised, his voice thick with emotion. "I swear it, Clara. You're mine to protect." Clara felt a rush of warmth flood her chest, a mix of relief and desire. But the weight of his words also settled heavily between them. She knew the cost. She knew the danger. But she also knew that she couldn't walk away. Not now, not when she had come so far. Before she could respond, Victor leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was both gentle and desperate. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of grief, of a connection that neither of them had been able to fight. It was the kind of kiss that made her feel like everything in the world had stopped, that made her forget about the dangers and the risks, and just focus on the feeling of his arms around her. When they finally pulled apart, Clara's breath was ragged, her heart pounding in her chest. Victor looked at her, his amber eyes burning with intensity. "I can't lose you," he repeated, his voice a whisper. Clara nodded, her hands gripping his shirt. "You won't." Victor's face softened, the storm in his eyes easing just a little. "I'll keep you safe," he promised, his voice low. Clara smiled, a small, knowing smile. "We'll keep each other safe." And for the first time in days, Clara felt like maybe, just maybe, she could do this. She could be a part of this world. She could love him, protect Lucia, and survive the dangers that surrounded them. But she also knew the cost. The stakes were higher now. And there was no turning back. The following weeks passed in a strange, surreal blur. Clara had made her choice. She had walked deeper into Victor's world, into the heart of the chaos, and into a life she never could have imagined. The mansion, once so foreign to her, had started to feel like home. The long corridors, the high stone walls, the sound of Lucia's laughter echoing through the halls, it was all strangely comforting. And Victor! He was everything she had feared and more. Ruthless. Powerful. Yet, in the quiet moments between them, when he held her close or whispered his fears in her ear, she saw the man he really was, the man who would do anything to protect his daughter, the man who had buried his pain under layers of power and control. Clara spent her days with Lucia, continuing their routines, tea parties, counting stars, teaching her how to ride a bike in the garden. The child's laughter had become more frequent, her eyes less shadowed by grief. But Clara knew, deep down, that this was only a small victory. The weight of what Lucia had lost would never truly leave her. Still, it was enough. It wasn't just the child Clara had grown close to. It was Victor. Their relationship was like a slow burn, one that neither of them had expected. The tension, the moments of stolen glances, the lingering touches that left both of them breathless, it was undeniable. And yet, every time Clara thought she might get too close, too involved, something would happen to remind her of the danger that always loomed over them. One evening, after Lucia had gone to bed, Clara found herself alone in the study once more. The house was quiet, except for the distant hum of security systems and the faint sounds of footsteps outside the window. Victor had promised her that nothing would happen to her, that he would protect her at all costs. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that they were always just a moment away from being torn apart by the world Victor lived in. She sat by the fireplace, staring into the flames, lost in thought, when Victor entered the room. His presence seemed to fill the space, even before he spoke. "Clara," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of something unsaid. "We need to talk." She turned toward him, her heart beating faster than it should. "What's wrong?" Victor hesitated, his gaze flickering to the door as if making sure they were alone. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. "There are things in my world, things I can't protect you from, no matter how much I want to." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She stood up, her pulse racing. "What are you talking about?" Victor's eyes locked with hers. "There are people who know about you, who know what you mean to me, and they'll use you against me if they get the chance." Clara's stomach dropped. She could feel the weight of his words settling in her chest, a knot tightening around her heart. "So, what are we supposed to do? Run? Hide?" "No," he said firmly, taking her hand. "I'm not running. But I won't let you be a target, either." He pulled her closer, his voice low and serious. "I need you to stay out of this world, Clara. You need to be safe. If you stay with me, you'll always be a part of this, of my world. And I can't let that happen to you." Clara felt a surge of frustration and fear. "I'm already part of your world, Victor. I don't want to leave." He shook his head, his fingers gripping hers tightly. "You don't understand. This world is dangerous. The people I deal with, they won't hesitate to hurt you to get to me. And I can't live with that. I can't lose you." Clara's mind raced. The fear, the danger, it was all so overwhelming. She had made her choice. She had chosen him, chosen Lucia. She wasn't going to walk away now, not when everything had already been set in motion. But could she truly survive this? Could they all survive the world that Victor had brought her into? She looked into his eyes, searching for something, an answer, a sign that maybe she wasn't making the wrong choice. "I'm not leaving," she whispered. "You're not getting rid of me that easily." Victor's gaze softened, his hand cupping her face as he leaned in closer. "I'm not asking you to leave," he said softly. "I'm asking you to stay with me. But you need to know what that means. You need to understand the risks." "I know the risks," Clara replied, her voice trembling but firm. "And I still choose this. I choose you. I choose Lucia. I choose this family." Victor stared at her, his eyes flickering with a mix of awe and something deeper, something darker. He didn't say anything at first. Instead, he pulled her into his arms, his hold tightening around her as if he were afraid she might slip away. "I'll protect you, Clara," he whispered against her hair. "No matter what happens. I swear it." Clara closed her eyes, letting herself feel the weight of his promise, knowing that in this world of shadows and danger, this was the only certainty she had. And as much as she feared the unknown, she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't walking away. Not now. Not ever. As they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, Clara realized that the life she had chosen wasn't perfect. It was messy, dangerous, and uncertain. But it was theirs. And for better or worse, she would face whatever came next, together with Victor, together with Lucia.